All right, hello everyone. It is the beginning here of week 3. We are going to start out this session at the beginning of the week, much like we do all of our other sessions, with a bit of peer review. You have submitted your compositions for the Angry Bots project. And let's see, here we go. I have the submissions here. So we will start out our session with a discussion of the previous week's composition, the previous week's project, and I'll go through all of these and discuss them as a whole first, just kind of what we're listening for from this project, and then I'll get into the specifics about each one of the particular submissions for peer review. And again, we have a total of, I think, 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, 8 submissions from this week's peer review. And each week I hope to encourage more people to participate. So we have, we'll start out here, and then we will move on into the new assignments for week 3. We have this week we are shifting over to more of the technical side of things, of how do we actually take the music and the sound effects that you've worked on so far and put them into the game so that we can test them out and show off what the work that you've done thus far. So we are going to turn our focus towards using the software Wise. We are going to use an audio middleware tool that will allow us to take the WAV files that you have created and get them working in the game so that you can test out how the music and how the sound effects work when all playing back together. So after our discussion of peer review, we will get into a discussion of how you actually, we'll start with 2D platformer, and how do you actually take those WAV files and set them up using Wise so that you can actually get them into the game and start testing them and working with them and seeing the final result. And then on Thursday, we will move over to the second composition, Angry Bots, and we will take all of the compositions that you just finished out here in week 2 and the sound effects that went along with that, and we'll start putting that into Wise. And you'll already be familiar where a lot of the same steps, you'll use a lot of the same approach that you did in 2D platformer, also for Angry Bots, but there'll be a couple of new ideas and new approaches that we need to implement for a different type of game. So this week we turn more towards the technical, where in a ongoing project, there would, when you start things out, you typically have a very long to-do list of all sorts of music that you and places that need to be filled with music throughout the game. And over time, that list of to-dos gets smaller and smaller, and your list of approved, finished, completed music gets bigger and bigger, and that pile of music now needs to make its way into the game. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over time as music becomes more in its finished, complete state. It starts working its way into the final game. So we'll kind of take that shift now where we have a folder filled with WAV files, both music and sound effects, and then what do we do to actually get them so that when the player plays the game, they perform that action or they hit that button, there is the correct sound effect waiting for them. So that is our course of action for today. So let's start out with the discussion here of your submissions that you finished out last week. You now have completed your music and sound effects for our second game called Angry Bots. So in this session that I have, this logic session that I have loaded up here, let's see. Each student that submitted, you have kind of this vertical column of all of the files with an ambient, 3 action cues, and then the 3 stingers down over here. And so you'll see that each of the all 4 of the ambient and action cues are stacked vertically on top of each other so that they can play together. And then, so we'll listen to each one of these one at a time. We'll listen to them in different combinations, and then we'll jump over here to the stingers and listen to those. So, the overall, our goal and the kinds of things that we're listening for is to make sure that any combination of these main 4 files can play back together and make sense to when they're played back in any sort of combination. So in the game, you will always hear the ambient cue. And at different times, you will hear just the ambient cue by itself. You will hear the ambient cue with 1 or 2 or 3, any 3 of these, or all 4 of them playing at the same time. When any one of the robots comes out to attack, then you will hear the corresponding musical theme for that robot. And it's kind of hard to get all 4 of them playing together. You kind of have to have them chase you around and make sure that each one of the robots is in the same area at the same time. But there is that possibility, and you never know at any time which combination of these 4 files are going to play. So in order to make this work, you compose the music such that it starts at the same time, it's going to end at the same time, and everything is at the same tempo and time signature, so it makes sense as it loops around. Wherever you end up, you should finish your musical thought so that it can return back to the top and start all over again. And so we're looking for this nice kind of walled off or kind of squarish or rectangular setup of these tracks where they all start and end at the same time. You have to watch out for gaps at the end of the file. Anytime I see these multiple bounced files with the same time at the end, I typically think it is because of include audio tail. You want to make sure at all times, well, at least for the purposes of our projects, to make sure that this is off so that it doesn't add a little bit of extra silence or tail at the end of the file. So leave that off as you're bouncing, because otherwise it looks like somewhere around here they all do end at the same time, and so musically they'll finish at the same point. So you might just need to edit those files down. So you want them to start at the same time, end at the same time. Make sure they all loop together. I'm just going to go through, look at each one of these. Watch out again for these little tails, or anytime the files are different lengths. If the files end up being different lengths, then it causes issues as it loops, like this. There's 2 ways. You want to make sure that even the ambient cue is the same length as these 3 action cues. There's 2 ways that the music can error as it loops. If the files are not the same length, then there's 2 issues that might come up. Depends on how the files loop. One way would be the way that Logic loops. Like if I grab the loop tool here, and do all 4 of these at the same time, you'll notice that the 3 action cues loop at a different time than the ambient cue. So they will get farther and farther off, or farther and farther out of sync as the music continues to play. So that's one way where each one of the file just immediately starts over as it loops. The other way is like this. Let's see if this will work. Nope, it doesn't work. Is more like this. There we go. Where it will just wait for the longest file to end, and then they'll all start over again. So they'll be in sync as they play through, but when they reach the end of the the shorter files stop, and the longer file just continues to play. And when the longest file is done, everything starts over again, and it plays through one more time. So either of those are going to cause issues. So you always want to make sure that they are always the same length. What else? The ambient cue, the ambient file will always play. So you want to make sure that any of the instrumentation that is found in, any of the cues is unique. You want to make sure that instrumentation only exists in the cue that is unique to. So no repeated instrumentation. Oftentimes I'll hear the ambient and it's copied in also playing through the any one of the action cues. And when the files then play together, they loop. I'm sorry, they layer and stack. Where's my mixer here? So I'm just going to bring all these faders down. Come on. There it goes. So for the most part, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. So this file will have a core amount of instrumentation in it that is not heard in any of the other action cues. If you were to repeat any instrumentation when you brought the next fader up, a lot of times I'll hear bass instruments or synths that are repeated, or drums or percussion, like a kick and a snare is heard in multiple cues. And therefore, when you add 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of them together, it stacks up and overloads everything, and now you're kicking your snare too loud. So you want to make sure that each instrument is contained, each instrument that is unique to a particular cue is only contained in that cue. There we go. What else? The overall mix, you want to make sure that when all 4 of these are playing at the same time, it does not overload the master. You want to watch out when all 4 of these are playing at the same time. I'm going to turn up the stereo bus here, which will broadcast this, but you want to make sure that it doesn't go into the red. So with each one of these playing at the same time, one of them by themselves might be okay, but if I bring all of them up at the same time, very quickly it goes into the red, and it causes issue, because all the faders in the game are going to do is go between negative infinity and 0. They're not going to be mixed. Well, you can mix them in the game, but your best bet is to have it set up so when all 4 faders are at unity, that is the perfect mix that you want, and you don't overload the master. What else? We want to make sure that the ambient, we are mainly listening for a difference between the intensity level of the ambient and action cue. We want to make sure that the ambient cue is less intense than the action cue. The ambient cue can have rhythm to it. It can have bass, and it can have power. It can have a progression. Can have a melody, or doesn't need to have a traditional structure. But whenever the action cue comes in, you need more power, more intensity, more pace and energy to the mix. So you need an increase in the overall pacing of the music. That typically comes from additional percussion, additional kind of subdividing the beat, where you may be on a quarter note or an eighth note, and so you go down to 16th notes and bring in different rhythmic variations to up the pacing and energy of the cues. We want to make sure that each one of the cues has instrumentation that not only is unique to it, but kind of gives a foreshadowing of whatever that robot is. You want to make sure that the player can identify which robot is coming after them or coming to attack just by the music. So even if they're off screen, you can hear them coming, and it's kind of intimidating because you know what's coming next. So unique instrumentation, unique rhythms, melodic ideas, thematic ideas work really well to kind of give the sense. All right, let's see. That should be enough of explanation overall. Actually, one more thing would be the biggest thing that can fall apart here is dissonance. Either clashing notes or clashing rhythms, where cues are at a different tempo, in a different key, or not following the same chord progression, so that when you play multiple layers at the same time, it doesn't really make sense. So we're always going to watch out to make sure that in these faders in any combination still makes sense. It's all following a core progression and a core structure to make sense as it kind of plays along. All right. So let me go through each one of them and chat about what we're hearing. And I won't. They're each about a minute long, so I'm not going to play through all of each one of them. But I will play each one of them and then play all four of them at the same time, so we can get a sense of what it sounds when played back together. All right, we'll start out with the first one here. All right, so there's a little bit of a pulse here. The instrumentation works. It's got this cool kind of low end to it, and I've got the kind of delay, kind of gated synth on the top there. One thing it would be nice to have. It would be nice to have some other instrumentation being introduced at different times through this cue. That's one thing I say often about the ambient, is that you want to make sure that there is some change, there is some progression. I hear the chord progression, but once the instrumentation is established, it pretty much stays the same. So let's go ahead and bring in the buzzer cue. Would like to hear some more percussion added with the buzzer. Okay, the buzzer cue has the ambient cue in it, or a lot of the same instrumentation. So yeah, it doubles up when you play both of them together. Let's do the spider cue now, next. Alright, so the main thing is watch out for repeating the ambient in multiple cues, and then each one of the action cues needs to have percussion in it to create more of that pace and bring up more of the energy. You have the lead synth line. This one feels a little dissonant against the chord progression, which would work if there was kind of more variation against it. But watch out for the repetition in these kind of phrases. Alright, so the mech cue has the click in it. Watch out for that. So we have the drums here, that's good. You could probably work with having different percussion in the different cues. This one kind of feels like at a halftime pace. Work with against halftime and double time, and against the main tempo of the music. To give you kind of pockets to work in rhythmically. So adding a hi-hat, adding other smaller percussion at a faster tempo will kind of help the overall energy. So let's bring it together. Now the problem is definitely is the overall level that they're bounced. mainly because the ambience in each one of them. So you want to make sure that you want to make sure that you watch out for the overall master, bounce them all, rearrange the tracks so that the ambient cue only contains the ambient cue is only contained in the ambient cue, and watch the levels as they bounce. All right, let's check out the stingers. I think I see the metronome here. Let's try that again. Okay, sounds mostly like a crash. I think there is like a bass drop in there. So make sure the impact is a lot stronger. Well, that sounds the same. All right, they're all too similar. You can go for a kick and a crash, but have some sort of modulation, some sort of delay or filter sweep or reverb or some other synth layers that kind of make each stinger unique and provide a sense of movement or change over that short period of time. All right. Very good. Let's go on to the next one here. So the first thing I see is the gaps at the end of each one of the files. So we'll take that into account as we loop. Let's see how this works. Let's not play them all at the same time. Let's try that. All right, I like the little bit of percussion. Probably, overall, I'm going to guess that we need a bit more level across all 4 of these cues. I would say the same sort of thing with the development. Add more instrumentation that comes in and out of the mix or changes over time. Sounds pretty sparse with just like the single kind of pad synth in the background. So a couple more layers through the ambient cue. Let's bring in the buzzer. Okay, again, it sounds like the ambient cue is contained in the buzzer. Looped pretty well there. Make sure that the ambient cue instrumentation only is in the ambient cue file. Again, add more instrumentation to this cue, add more percussion especially, to add a little bit more energy to, once you have the little bit of percussion in the ambient, add another layer for each one of the new action cues. The synth works, but still sounded kind of sparse. Add a few more layers overall. Here's the spider. Sounds like either the buzzer is also contained in the spider cue, or it's a very similar synth. So watch out, make sure that each cue only contains unique instrumentation. And then again, more percussion through here, more unique instrumentation for each cue. And this one should be a lot bigger overall, more powerful instrumentation. At this point you would have a pretty dense mix overall, and you're going to need to add unique percussion and synth elements to represent each one of the robots. And you can hear once you play all 4 of them, basically the ambient cue is quadrupled, and you hear it much louder than the rest of the instrumentation. All All right, so watch out for the distribution of the instrumentation. Add a lot more instruments and kind of melodic or thematic ideas that will give more of a sense or characteristic of each robot that kind of fits. It looks, I mean, it sounds like this is edited down that it does loop correctly. So make sure everything is formatted to loop. Let's do the stingers. Which are here. All right, these are going to be too low in volume. You're going to need, they're going to get lost in the mix. You're going to need a sharp impact, a big thump or hit. You could probably use those as layers, but with the sharp impact and a lot more volume, they'll kind of they'll stick out of the mix a bit clearer. All right, moving along here. All right, let's go back to the next ambient cue. Actually, that should be fine. Try this one. Alright, some cool textures. Overall, there's a little bit of kind of a hi-hat percussion that gives you a sense of what's coming up. Could maybe add a few more instrument layers that will modulate and kind of change or give some variation to these cues, or to these instruments. Let's do buzzer. Alright, the strings are there, but they feel really buried in the reverb. That needs a lot more attack and presence, so they should kind of be brought out of the reverb to give a bit more of a sense of action. They should also have some percussion to them. Yeah, they should have something that's, since you had the hi-hat earlier, something to kind of tie into that rhythm that will follow right along. You can hear that the strings kind of following that pattern, but really missing a strong attack in order to be intelligible. The mech cue actually seems quite a bit smaller in volume than the rest of them. Probably should have a lot more power. I'm going to listen to the spider cues. All right. Alright, I think it kind of fits with the rhythm. Does feel like it's a bit, loops a bit. Having a kind of more instrumentation that follows the progression that's already established in the ambient cue. Instead of going around in the da 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 da. There's just that kind of rhythmic pattern gets quite repetitious through here. Having bigger instrumentation and more layers to add the density to each one of these cues, so that there's enough layers to work on to provide variation throughout the cue. Here's the mech cue. Right, so we have drums, but it's really difficult to hear that kick snare pattern against all the rest of the instrumentation. So try for stronger percussion in each cue, That will help the energy and like work on the attack and the presence of the instrumentation to kind of help that rhythm all the way through each cue. Let's see. Everything mostly fits together, but it kind of loses the overall definition of each cue. So again, having more unique instrumentation will help that feel. Let's jump over to the stingers here. These look like they should work. Very good. Maybe a little bit more thump or impact. It feels like it, each one of them feels like they should, but maybe it's just a volume thing or more attack or something like that. But design-wise, they sound really good. I just need a little bit more punch, just so they punch through the mix. So compressors, limiters, and transient shapers will help all of that to give a little bit more punch to the sound. All right. Doing good so far. Let's go ahead and try the next one here. Start with the ambient. Cool. All right, so great texture and kind of soundscape there. I do like the kind of open feel to it, the progression, and the all the little kind of percussion flares that are happening in the background, kind of flourishes, these little sweeps like that. All of that works very well through the ambient cue. Let's go with the buzzer action. All right, fits nicely against the ambient cue. There's unique instrumentation that's added. There's percussion added to give it more energy. Follows the main progression that's set in the ambient cue. Kind of follows the same form and has little percussive rolls and changes at the same time the ambient does. Let's go to the spider cue. Each cue has its own unique instrumentation, so you can hear the new changes with each cue. So you might have maybe some of the percussion might be a little thin, maybe some bigger hits. Since it's kind of feels like its filter is scooped out, has a low cut on it, so there's a lot of room in the low end. Maybe that makes room for some of the other cues. But just some hits on the downbeats or the chord changes might work. And the mech seems quite a bit louder than the rest of them. There we go. There's a good, strong energy here. Yeah, great changes in each one. Strong melodic definition of each cue. The stronger instrumentation, with strong instrumentation in each cue. There's a positive development in the melodic idea and the progression all the way through, and each of the cues makes sense against it. Let's bring them all in together. Right, pretty much stays there, just maybe touches the master a little bit when playing back together, so that might be something to watch out for. But overall, I think the mix works out well, and I think that the form of it, mostly, where you've made pockets for the different melodic ideas and how it all fits together. Overall, I kind of wanted to save this for the end. There might be a question of the chosen progression and the melodic ideas being too maybe positive and hopeful, and it almost feels like I just won the battle versus that I'm deep in the middle of it. It's more of the major kind of heroic feel to a lot of the melodies mainly, and some of the chord changes that were chosen, and the progression as a whole could probably have a darker tinge to it overall, to reflect the attitude of or the intensity of the battles and the robots. But that's a much more of a subjective, creative discussion to be had about the overall game and the context of it, and how the music is supposed to support that. Functionally, and just the overall approach to this works out very well. So, nice job overall. Let's see how that works against the Stingers. Helps if I turn up the fader. All right, so kick drums in some sort of modulation or gate or tremolo or something there, and they work well as maybe a layer. Could probably use a some sort of synth or modulation on top. Well, I mean, I guess you have the kick with the modulation of the reverb after that. That sounds good, but having a instrument in the higher layer, whether it's a drop or some sort of effect that kind of supports or is supported by that low kick. There could be the chance that it gets lost with such low end, it gets lost in all the activity of the rest of the mix, but something to consider when listening to all of it play back together. All right, here in the chat, and when you get a chance, could you tell me what was needed for mine? I understood the sound didn't mix well, and to add drums, but I didn't understand what you meant about different instrumentation. So back here, let's see. Let me just go through this quickly again. Or as quickly as my logic will allow. Let's see. All right, so going with the action cues, I would say when talking specifically about the instrumentation, the main things that I focused on here in the buzzer was the clarity of the instrumentation, so that you could kind of bring it out of reverb and hear more of the direct attack, plus adding percussion in here to give more energy from this action cue when it's introduced. So there's tom, there's low, like timpanis in there, there's strings, but it does sound quite far off, and so a stronger attack to each one of these instrument layers will definitely work. I would add more instrumentation to the mech cue. Beyond, you got drums and you've got a string line in there. So add add instrumentation that follows the main progression. Add this kind of feels like a repeating kind of figure here. So add a melodic lead line that develops over the course of the cue. Something basically I have drums and a string line, and I need instrumentation that fills out the holes in between there. And with the spider cue here, work on the repetition of the percussion and I guess the arpeggiator, where you have the phrase, it's like chord change, da da, chord change, da da da, change, da da da, change, da da da, like that kind of repeating figure there, that repeating idea, so that there is more change over the course of each cue, with extra instrumentation there to support it. Yeah, like that little piece works well. If you added more stuff like that at different times in the cue, and then also change the instrumentation below it, you would have less repetition overall. So those were some of the things that I focused on that submission. All right, next one here. This one, we can tell that when multiples of these are playing at the same time, each one of them are loud enough on their own right, and so when playing all four of them together, it will overload the master. So you want to make sure that you mix them individually, such that when they play back together, they make sense and don't overload the master. All right, watch out for the loops. Watch out for the fact that the mech is longer than the rest of them. Those will all create challenges as it loops. So it feels more like kind of a linear song composition, where each 4 or 8 bars a particular instrument is introduced. So when it comes back here to loop, it just stops and comes back around again, and it starts back over with just the organ. So you're going to want to make this so that it's set up to loop, not adding new layers each couple of bars. You want to start with all of the instrumentation. If you want to, you can break it down at some point where you remove instrumentation. It goes down to maybe just the beat, or the beat and a couple of other instrument layers, and then it rises back up to make sure that it can catch the loop again. So right now it feels like it's build, build, build all the way up through the queue, and then it drops back down as it starts over again. Format these files to loop a bit better, add more changes instead of having the repeating phrases that just get stacked on top of each other. Make sure that they develop and use the bars as much as they can. Here is the buzzer action cue. I'm going to guess that the ambient is in each cue. Start over again. All right, so it works. There's extra percussion. There is extra bass line. There's a string line that plays, but again, watch the repetition. Develop that string line, add other lines, other strings, other brass, other woodwinds to support that string. We go to the spider. I would move the pacing faster between these different cues. It's still on the same drum pattern that was established in the ambient cue. Really hasn't felt to increase the pace. And each cue needs to have its own unique instrumentation. Alright, so the brass swells work to give another layer, kind of in a higher register that wasn't used before. There's more drums, that helps to bring up the energy. But it's also, this cue is basically all four of them playing together. And if I went back, and what the game's actually going to do is this, which will create a lot of issues as the different instruments are layered up. So, watch how the instrumentation is built and used. Now this one with the faster hi-hats give a little bit more pace to it. And some of the other cues could use kind of that smaller instrumentation on a smaller subdivision. So where you're kicking your snares on the 2 and 4, maybe your hi-hats are on quarter notes on one, or on an eighth note pattern on another, or some variation of those rhythms. Again, subdividing the beat or using half time and double time to find rhythmic pockets for your music to work in. We'll jump down here. Here are 3 stingers. That would work if it had the low impact in it. Cool. Probably a little bit more thump or attack there. Alright, so the synth layers work. Just needs a little bit more hit. Watch out for the gap at the beginning here. You want to make sure there's no silence, or everything's in sync, or else it'll play out of time with a little bit of silence at the front. All right, where am I? 3 more. Doing good. All right. Let's go ahead and play the next one here. Alright, so you got a low, deep pad, you got a little bit of an arpeggiator in there. everything feels kind of bunched up towards the lower registers. So maybe something at the top, or maybe a hi-hat that kind of pokes through and provides a little bit of that rhythm. It's really kind of hard to catch there in the background. Oh, it's kind of panned off to the right. Yeah, so again, same sort of thing. There's once the instrumentation is established, there really isn't that much change to it. So adding in a couple of layers that come in and out of the mix over time. Buzzer cue. All right, there's the high-end percussion. Probably could use a little bit more than that, a little more like maybe low-end kick or low-end percussion that's adding some big intense hits. Some extra instrumentation in there. Alright, good groove there. Let's add the spider in. Alright, this one needs its own percussion. I'm waiting for the kind of 4-on-the-floor kick. Maybe that's coming in the mech action. Okay. Definitely need a kick and snare kind of pattern at some point. It's mostly relying on the arpeggiated synths. Everything works together when played back at the same time, but since the reliance on the arpeggiators create kind of a repeating patterns that need to have more variation. So watch out for the repetition through these cues. Form-wise, it works. It starts at the same time, ends at the same time, stays in sync all the way through. Each cue does add a new layer for instrumentation and that kind of arpeggiated pulse to it, but some stronger percussion would definitely bring up the overall intensity. The groove is good, like the vibe overall is good with the synths, just needs a couple other instrument layers. All right, 3 stingers. Yeah, with the other synths, was the composition being heavy synth-based, those kind of synth notes will get lost, I would bet. It's cool effects, and it could actually be used to provide some of the change and variation over the cue, but definitely needs that strong hit, the strong impact to give that punch, to make sure the player kind of pays attention and is distracted while those cues are playing. All right. Moving along here. Let's try our next one. Would like to hear some change from that arpeggiated line. I like the progression. Looks like something's coming up here. Yeah, alright, so watch out for the loop. I would watch out for the big change here in the cue, because trying The change works, but trying to get back here from this change makes it a little bit more difficult. And it seems like there's some fade ins and fade outs. So watch out. Yeah, this fade in. So watch out for this change here. I would probably add this over here somewhere and like have it play in the middle so you have control of getting into this change and then getting out of it. So this does provide some variation, but it is kind of tagged on to the end here, and it makes the looping difficult. So add, kind of rearrange where these changes happen. All right, let's play this. We'll bring in the buzzer. So there's some good strength from the percussion, some good instrumentation in there. Yeah, seems to be some solid changes and kind of rhythmic variation over the course of the cue. It works with the ambient cue. Provides that intensity. Let's go to Spider. Cool. Spider has different instrumentation, has different percussion, a different pattern, very obvious, unique instrumentation. Let's bring in the buzzer. Percussion sits in a different place, but still fits against all the other cues. And Matt. All right, good pace. The mech brings in the double time kind of feel. Cool. When all of them play, they each have their own. You can hear each. If you pay attention to each one of the cues, you can hear something from it that is unique. Do watch the overall level when they play together. When you combine all three of these, it does hit the master too hard. Cool. I think it fits well for the overall vibe of the game. I think each one of the layers fits well against the other. So nice work overall. Just a few things here and there to tweak. These, with the power of these cues, I think these stingers are going to get lost against it. Well, especially if I don't bring up the fader. Watch out that they don't get cut off at the end. And you probably want to start directly at the peak of, you don't want them to fade in, so they have a strong attack at the beginning. These probably need more volume, more attack, like that low-end thump or kick or impact for each one of them to compete, with the rest of the instrumentation that is heard in the mix. All right, and one more here. Again, the ambient cue is going to be too long compared to the other ones, so just chop it down a bit and make sure it loops. Let's start listening. Start there. All right, there's drums there, but it does sound very far off. The pad is, it works. Provides a cool texture for the cue, but there needs to be, again, more change, more variation. Is the drums like one of these other faders or something? No, I think it's in that ambient cue. So watch the bounce of the ambient. Make sure you have a couple more instrument layers that provide more unique changes over the course of this cue. Let's go ahead and add the buzzer. Again, the drums could come up in the mix, provide more of the energy. The bass works, but yeah, you need some more layers on top. I feel like I have drums and bass, like the progression, the overall foundation of the cue, but I need some instrumentation in a higher register, creating more development through the cue. Here's the spider. All right, sounds like just seeing if the instrumentation's repeated. Yeah, it sounds like maybe the buzzer is in instrumentation is in multiple cues. A lot of instrumentation is repeated, so it's kind of hard to tell which instrumentation is added to make each cue unique. Make sure that each cue only has instrumentation that is unique to that particular cue. Make sure that the rhythm works out, especially once you start layering them together or adding more layers. But make sure that it's pretty forward in the mix, because that's going to provide a lot of the energy, a lot of the power of the mix. And then you have drums, you have instrumentation in the lower registers, but add a couple more things in the higher registers to cut through the mix and provide that variation and development over the course of the cue. All right. It does have a nice intensity to it, especially from the drums, which works out well for the vibe of the game. And here are 3 stingers. Watch out for reusing some of the same synths. It'll probably get lost. That one works. The first one sounds maybe a little too thin, although I do like the kind of echo in the tail on it. So yeah, put a big, strong impact or low-end thump into each one of these, and they'll probably work out pretty well. All right, that's certainly a lot to discuss. Good ideas from everybody. We heard good approaches, and again, most of the stuff that I am talking about in the game most of the things I am talking about in the compositions are not really the idea of like scrap it, start it all over again, and go back to the drawing board. Most of it is in the context of working on the game, meaning how are they layered together. The repeating instrumentation, that's a pretty common one, because it's not until you kind of see how all this stuff lays out that you see how it might double or stack up in the mix. The looping files, the overall mix of making sure that when all 4 of them play together, it doesn't destroy the master output. Those are the kinds of things I think are most valuable overall. So if you have any questions on this or any of the feedback or review, please let me know. You'll have an opportunity to make any changes through the rest of the month before the kind of final version of everything as you work on getting it into the game. So that is where we are going to go now. And that's the discussion we will have at this point. We're going to switch from the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016, and my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go. Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D platformer Wise setup and Angry Bots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session, and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There is a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the WISE project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right in next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. It will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch WISE and make sure I open up the project to get started somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise. And then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that, and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up, and then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the sound banks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events. And events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor Mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the WAV files here, and we are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So you can, a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together, and we are going to do the same thing here. we are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist, Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives, the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, so I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play at one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time, though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all 3 of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that the application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have 2 events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right. So when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects: bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together, so you have quick access. highlight all of my wave files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine. So we're going to hit import. I'll just go to project save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy Death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And Taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So we're going to click on this default work unit again. And up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX Enemy Death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right. The next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this Jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX Ouch. And the last one here is SFX Taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right. So this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse. And this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. Gunshot. Health pickup. Browse. Health pickup. Jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container, taunt. Select taunt random container. All right, now I have messages. Seem to work. All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit generate. And when you hit generate, this message will pop up, and it says evaluation mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents. Resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this. And you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that. Or if you have any other issues, please get into contact with us and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely Wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about 1 minute long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they are very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. Well, let me just do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track, and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, 8th notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition. and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, and other than that, have a good day. Thanks.